They say home is where the heart is. For the last 5 years, my home had been a full-time, unpaid, and deeply thankless job. My job title, if I had one, would have been a long, hyphenated string of nouns: caretaker, maid, bookkeeper, chef, daughter, and my bosses, my mother, and my older brother, Liam. They thought I was just the live-in help, the quiet, responsible fixture of the house who would always be there to clean up their messes. They were about to find out who really owned the house. If you've ever been the designated grown-up in your own family, the one everyone relies on but no one respects, then buckle up. This story is for you. It all started 5 years ago when my father had a major stroke. It didn't kill him, but it left him a shadow of the strong, vibrant man he used to be. He was left with partial paralysis on his left side and a host of other health complications that required around-the-clock care. At the time, I was 28, living in the city, and working as a senior software engineer at a company I loved. I had my own life, my own friends, my own future. But when the call came, I didn't hesitate. I packed up my apartment, put my career on hold, and moved back home, back to the large, sprawling, and rapidly crumbling family house where I grew up. My mother, a woman who had always been more concerned with her social calendar than her family's well-being, was completely overwhelmed by the reality of being a caregiver. My brother, Liam, the golden boy, was far too busy with his very important sales job in the city to be bothered with the mundane, daily grind of caring for a sick parent. So the responsibility, as it always did in our family, fell to me. For 5 years, I was the one who got up at dawn to help my father with his morning routine, to administer his complex cocktail of medications. I was the one who learned to cook the special, low-sodium meals for his diet. I was the one who dealt with the endless stream of visiting nurses, physical therapists, and doctors. I was also the one who dealt with the house itself, the leaky pipes in the basement, the ancient furnace that would die on the coldest day of the year, the never-ending yard work. I did it all, while also trying to work my own demanding job remotely from a makeshift office in the dusty spare bedroom. I did it out of love for my father. He was my hero, and seeing him so vulnerable, so dependent, broke my heart. He was kind and grateful, his eyes full of a sad, loving appreciation for everything I was doing. He was largely unaware of the toxic dynamic that was brewing around him. Because my mother and my brother didn't see my sacrifice, they saw an opportunity. They saw me as the permanent, built-in solution to their problem, with me handling everything at home. My mother was free to continue her life of long lunches and charity committee meetings, and Liam was free to live his carefree bachelor life in the city. They treated me not as a loving daughter and sister, but as the staff. Liam would come home on weekends, treating the house like his personal hotel and laundry service. He'd bring his loud friends, leave a trail of empty beer bottles and pizza boxes in his wake, and drop a pile of his dirty laundry by the washing machine with a cheerful, "Hey, Soph, could you just run a load for me? You're the best." My mother was worse. She would sweep in after a day out with her friends, her eyes immediately scanning for any sign of imperfection. "Sophie, darling, the dust on this mantelpiece is a disgrace," she'd say, running a finger along the surface. "And are you sure you're giving your father the blue pill at night? I read an article that said the green one is more effective." She would question my every decision, undermine my authority with the nurses, and treat me with a constant, grating air of condescending disapproval. The final straw, the event that would set our entire dysfunctional family on a collision course, was a party. Liam's 30th birthday was coming up, and he decided he wanted to throw a massive, loud, blowout bash at our house. "It'll be epic," he announced one Sunday. During his weekly visit, "We can get a DJ, set up a bar in the backyard. It'll be the party of the year." I just stared at him, my mind immediately going to my father. The doctor's orders were crystal clear. My father needed a quiet, calm, stress-free environment. A loud, drunken party with 100 of my brother's obnoxious friends was the absolute worst thing for his health. "No," I said simply. Liam and my mother both turned to look at me, their expressions identical masks of shocked indignation. "What do you mean, no?" my brother asked, a sneer on his face. "I mean, no," I repeated, my voice firm. "Dad needs to rest." The doctor was very clear. No stress, no loud noises. We are not having a massive party here. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Sophie, my mother sighed, rolling her eyes. It's your brother's 30th birthday. It's an important milestone. We have to celebrate him. Your father will be fine. He can just stay in his room. He can just stay in his room, I asked, my voice rising with a disbelief that was quickly turning to rage. While his son throws a rave in his living room, absolutely not. I am his primary caregiver, and I am putting my foot down. The answer is no. The argument that followed was one of the worst we had ever had. They called me a tyrant. They called me controlling. They called me a joyless shrew who was trying to ruin my brother's birthday out of sheer jealousy. Through it all, I held my ground. I was not protecting my own peace. I was protecting my father's health. The fight ended with my mother and brother storming out of the house. My mother screaming that she didn't know who I thought I was, and that I had finally gone too far. I was left alone in the quiet house, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I knew I had done the right thing, but I also knew I had just declared war. I had finally, after years of quiet compliance, stood up to them, and I knew they would not let it stand. I just had no idea how swift, how cold, and how brutal their retaliation would be. The aftermath of the fight over Liam's birthday party was a week of tense, weaponized silence. My mother and my brother, Liam, moved through the house like two angry ghosts, communicating with each other in loud, pointed whispers just outside my earshot, and communicating with me not at all. They were punishing me with their silence, trying to make me feel so isolated and uncomfortable that I would break, apologize, and let them have their way. The atmosphere in the house was thick with their resentment, and I felt more like a prison warden than a daughter. I was emotionally exhausted. My best friend, Anna, could hear it in my voice when I spoke to her on the phone that Friday. "Sophie, you sound like you're at the end of your rope," she said, her voice full of a concern that I wasn't getting from anyone in my own house. "You cannot keep living like this. You're going to burn out. You need a break." "I can't leave, Dad," I said, my voice a weary sigh. "Yes, you can," she insisted. "For one night, I've already called Mrs. Gable, that wonderful retired nurse from down the street. She's happy to come and stay with your father for one evening. You, my friend, are coming to stay with me. I'm making you dinner. We're opening a bottle of wine, and we are going to watch a stupid movie. That is not a request. It is an order. The thought of it, of just one night away from the toxic, oppressive atmosphere of that house, felt like a gasp of fresh air to a drowning woman. I reluctantly agreed. I spent the afternoon going over my father's complicated medication schedule with Mrs. Rauquartz's Gable, packed a small overnight bag, and by 6 o'clock, I was walking out the door. My mother and Liam were in the living room. They watched me leave, their faces cold and stony masks of disapproval. They didn't say a word. The evening at Anna's apartment was a lifesaver. We ate pasta and drank too much cheap wine. I vented. I cried. I raged. I told her everything, the endless work, the constant criticism, the feeling of being taken for granted. She just listened, her face full of the righteous anger on my behalf that my own husband should have had for a few precious hours. I felt like a normal person again. I felt seen. I went to sleep in her quiet, peaceful guest room, and for the first time in months, I didn't dream of my father's medication schedule or my mother's disapproving scowl. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter than I had in years. The sun was streaming through the window. It was a beautiful Saturday. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, a smile on my face, thinking I would call and check on my dad. And then I saw it, a text message from my mother, sent at 6:15 a.m. My blood ran cold. My mother never texted, and she certainly never texted at 6 in the morning. With a sense of profound, sickening dread, I opened it. The message was not a greeting. It was a declaration of war, a cold, formal, and brutally efficient execution. "Sophie," it read, "your brother and I have had a long discussion, and we have all agreed that your controlling and negative presence in this household has become detrimental to your father's health and the general peace of the family. We have therefore taken steps to rectify the situation. As of this morning, we have had all the locks on the front door changed. We have also changed the code on the main gate. We no longer require your services here. Your personal belongings from your room have been packed into boxes. We will have them sent to you in due course. This decision is final. I read the text once, then twice, then a third and fourth time. The words didn't seem to make sense. It felt like I was reading a foreign language. Changed the locks. Gate code. No longer require your services. It had to be a joke, a sick, twisted, monstrous joke. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I tried to call her. The call went straight to her voicemail, which was full. I tried to call my brother. Liam? Straight to voicemail. I tried to call the house landline. It just rang and rang, a hollow, endless sound in the quiet apartment. The reality began to sink in. A wave of icy water washing over me. This wasn't a joke. This was real. They had waited until I was gone. They had waited until I had left my post for a single night. And then they had staged a coup. They had thrown me out. They had exiled me from my own home, from my own father. They had locked me out. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete. It was almost sublime in its cruelty. After 5 years of sacrificing my own life to care for my father, of running that house, of cleaning up their messes, of enduring their constant, grating disrespect. This was my reward, a text message, an eviction notice. My friend Anna came into the room then, a cheerful smile on her face and 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She saw the look on my face, and her own smile vanished. Sophie, what is it? What's wrong? I couldn't speak. I just handed her my phone. I watched as she read the message, her eyes widening in horrified disbelief. Oh my God, she whispered. They didn't. I just stared at her, a single, hot tear finally breaking free and rolling down my cheek. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight on my chest. And then, another feeling began to stir. Beneath the shock, beneath the grief, beneath the white-hot rage. It was a different kind of feeling, a cold, quiet, and terrifyingly clear thought. They thought they had all the power. They thought they had successfully removed the inconvenient. Controlling daughter. They thought they had won. They thought they were locking me out of their house. They had forgotten one very, very important detail. A secret I had been keeping for 5 long years. A secret I had kept to save my father's pride. They had forgotten who really owned the house. I sat on the edge of my friend Anna's sofa, the damning text message from my mother glowing on the screen of my phone. Anna was pacing back and forth in front of me, radiating a righteous fury on my behalf. I'm going over there with you, she said, her eyes blazing. Right now, we are going to kick that door down. This is insane. Sophie, they can't just throw you out of your own home. It's not my home anymore, Anna, I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. They just made that perfectly clear. The hell it isn't, she shot back. You've given up the last 5 years of your life for that house, for your father. You are the only reason it's still standing. And that's when I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a cold, bitter, and slightly unhinged laugh, born from the absolute, spectacular irony of the situation. Anna stopped pacing and just stared at me, a worried look on her face. What is it? She asked gently. Soph, you're scaring me. They don't know. Anna, I whispered, shaking my head in disbelief. They have no idea. Don't know what. And so I told her. I told her the secret I had been keeping for 5 long years. The secret I had kept to protect my father's pride. The very pride he had just used to cast me aside. I told her about what happened 5 years ago. My father's construction business, which had been his life's work, had collapsed during the last major recession. He had taken out a second, then a third mortgage on the family house to try and keep it afloat. But it was no use. The business went bankrupt, and the bank was foreclosing on the house I grew up in. My father was a broken man. The thought of losing his home, the symbol of his entire life's work, was destroying him. His health, which had already been fragile, took a nosedive. My mother was a wreck, and my brother, Liam, was, as usual, completely useless, offering nothing but empty platitudes while secretly updating his resume and preparing to jump ship. At the time, I was living in the city. I was a senior software engineer for a major tech firm, a job my family had always dismissed as my little computer job. They had no idea I had been quietly, diligently investing my salary in the stock market for years. They had no idea I had a substantial portfolio and significant savings. I couldn't stand by and watch my father lose everything, but I knew his pride. He would never, ever accept a handout from me. His daughter, he would see it as the ultimate failure. So I devised a plan, a secret, anonymous rescue mission. I went to my lawyer. We set up a blind trust, a faceless LLC with a generic name, Northwood Property Group. Through that anonymous entity, my lawyer approached the bank that was holding my parents' delinquent mortgage. He made them an all-cash offer to buy the property in a short sale, for just over what was owed, before it went to public foreclosure auction. The bank, eager to get a non-performing loan off their books without the hassle of an auction, accepted immediately. The deed of ownership was transferred, quietly and legally, into the name of my LLC. I became the owner of my childhood home. Then came the performance, my lawyer, acting as the representative of the benevolent anonymous investor, contacted my parents. He told them that an old friend of my grandfather's, a man who wished to remain anonymous, had heard of my father's plight. Out of respect for the family name, this investor had bought the house and had graciously agreed to let my parents live there, rent-free, for as long as my father was alive. They believed it completely. It was a miracle, a story that saved my father's pride. He wasn't living on his daughter's charity. He was living under the protection of a mysterious, unseen benefactor, a guardian angel. For 5 years, I had played that part. I had been their guardian angel. I was the one who paid the massive property taxes every year through the LLC. When the ancient furnace finally died 2 winters ago, it was my money that paid for the $10,000 replacement. When the roof started to leak, I was the one who hired the roofers. All of it was done through my lawyer and the anonymous Northwood Property Group. And all the while, my mother and my brother, living in the very house I had saved for them, had treated me like the unpaid help. They had criticized me, dismissed me, and taken advantage of my loving care for my father. And now, they had locked me out. They had conspired to exile me from the property that I, and I alone, legally owned. When I finished my story, Anna just stared at me, her mouth agape in stunned silence. "So let me get this straight," she finally said, her voice a whisper of awe. "Your mother and your brother, who are currently living in your house, a house you secretly bought to save them from homelessness, have just changed the locks and kicked you out of your own house." "That about sums it up," I said with a cold smile. She started to laugh. A loud, delighted, furious laugh. "Oh, this is better than any reality show I have ever seen," she said, shaking her head. "This is a masterpiece, Sophie. You are a legend." She looked at me, her eyes shining with a fierce, protective fire. "So," she asked, "what are you going to do?" The shock and the hurt I had been feeling for the past few hours had now completely vanished, replaced by a cold, hard, and beautifully clear resolve. "I'm going to go home," I said, standing up and grabbing my purse. "And I'm going to introduce my mother and my brother to their new landlord." The initial shock that had frozen me in my friend Anna's apartment began to thaw, replaced by a clarity so cold and so absolute it was almost serene. The years of me being the peacemaker, the accommodating daughter, the one who would swallow her own pain to avoid a confrontation. That version of me had died with my mother's text message. A new Sophie was in her place, and she was done being quiet. "What are you going to do?" Anna asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and a kind of fascinated admiration. "I'm going to go home," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm going to introduce my family to their landlord." I made 2 phone calls. My movements were calm, precise, and efficient. I was no longer a heartbroken daughter. I was a software engineer, a problem solver, and I had just identified a critical bug in my family's operating system. It was time to debug. My first call was to my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Michael who handled the legal affairs for my LLC. "Michael, it's Sophie McGregor," I said, using my full legal name. "We have a situation at the Oakwood property. I need you to meet me there in 1 hour. Please bring a certified copy of the grant deed for the Northwood Property Group and draft a standard 24-hour notice to vacate, just in case. Understood, Urpath, he said, no questions asked. He was used to my strange requests. My second call was to the local police department's non-emergency line. Hello, I said, my voice a mask of calm professionalism. My name is Sophie McGregor. I'd like to request a civil standby. I am the legal owner of a property, and my tenants have illegally changed the locks and are currently denying me access. I have legal documentation of my ownership. I simply require an officer to be present to keep the peace while I regain entry to my home. The dispatcher, professional and calm, took down the information. An officer will meet you at the location in 1 hour, she said. Anna just stared at me, her mouth agape. Sophie, she breathed. You are my hero. I drove back to my house, with Anna following in her car behind me, a silent, supportive presence. I didn't feel rage anymore. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt a profound sense of purpose. The drive through the familiar, tree-lined streets of my neighborhood felt different. I was no longer just returning to my cage. I was returning to my kingdom. A single police car was already parked discreetly down the street when we arrived. My lawyer, Michael, pulled up in his sleek black sedan a moment later. The three of us met on the sidewalk. Ready? Michael asked, handing me the thick folder of documents. Ready, I said. We walked up the long driveway to the large, wrought iron gate that blocked the entrance to the property. I pressed the button on the intercom panel. A moment later, my mother's voice crackled through the speaker, dripping with smug satisfaction. Yes, can I help you? It's Sophie, Mom, I said, my voice even. Open the gate. There was a short, sharp laugh on the other end. I'm afraid I can't do that, she said, her voice full of a triumphant, condescending pity. As I explained in my text, you are no longer welcome here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before we are forced to call the police for trespassing. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her threatening to call the police on me for trespassing on my own property was the final confirmation I needed. My last flicker of doubt, of guilt, was extinguished. I turned to the police officer, a calm, professional man named Officer Davies, who had now walked up beside us. Officer, I said, as you can hear, these individuals are denying me access to my property. Officer Davies nodded and stepped up to the intercom. Ma'am, Pa, he said, his voice a firm, authoritative baritone. This is Officer Davies of the Oak Haven Police Department. The legal owner of this property is here. We are here simply to keep the peace while she regains entry. I'm going to have to ask you to open the gate. The legal owner, my mother sputtered through the speaker. Don't be ridiculous. This is my husband's house. This is our family home. She is the one who is not welcome here. This was my lawyer's cue. Michael stepped forward, holding a single notarized document up to the small security camera beside the intercom. Mrs. Hayes, he said, his voice calm and devastatingly formal. My name is Michael Vance, and I am the legal representative for the Northwood Property Group, LLC, the sole legal owners of this property. Your daughter, Sophie McGregor, is the managing partner and sole proprietor of that LLC. He held up a second document. This is a certified copy of the grant deed for this property, filed with the county recorder's office 5 years ago, proving my client's undisputed ownership. And this, he held up a third, is a formal notice to vacate the premises within 24 hours for all non-owner residents. He looked directly into the camera. If you do not open this gate immediately, I will be advising my client to press charges, and Officer Davies here will be forced to arrest you for criminal trespassing. The choice is yours. The silence on the other end of the intercom was absolute. I could picture the scene inside the house, my mother and my brother, Liam, standing in the foyer, their faces turning from smug triumph to pale, horrified disbelief as the truth of their situation finally, brutally, crashed down on them. They hadn't just locked out their long-suffering daughter. They had tried to evict their own landlord. After a long, stunned moment, the intercom crackled again. It was my brother's voice this time, small and trembling. There must be some mistake. The only mistake, my lawyer replied coolly, was yours. And then, with a slow, reluctant, grinding sound, The iron gates to my property began to swing open. The slow, grinding sound of the iron gates swinging open was the sound of my old life ending and my new one beginning. I walked up the long driveway. My lawyer Michael on one side, my friend Anna on the other, and the quiet, stoic police officer a few steps behind. It felt like a procession, a quiet, triumphant army, marching to reclaim my territory. My mother and my brother, Liam, were standing in the open doorway of the house. They looked like ghosts. Their faces, which had been so full of smug satisfaction just moments before over the intercom, were now pale, slack-jawed masks of pure, unadulterated horror. They watched me approach, not as their daughter or their sister, but as an invading force they were powerless to stop. From behind them, my father appeared in the hallway, leaning on his walker, his expression one of complete and utter confusion. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice weak. "Who are all these people?" I walked past my mother and brother without a word, stepping over the threshold and into the foyer of my own home. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of lemon polish and my mother's perfume. It smelled like my cage, but it was my cage, and I was about to rattle it. "Sophie," my mother whispered, her voice a strangled, desperate sound. "I don't understand. The deed, a mistake. This can't be real." "Oh, it's very real, Mother," I said. Turning to face her, I was no longer the quiet, accommodating daughter. I was the sole proprietor of Northwood Property Group, LLC, and I was done being nice. I looked at my father, my heart aching with a mixture of love and a deep, profound sadness for the humiliation he was about to endure. "Dad," I said gently, "I think you should sit down." I then proceeded to tell them the whole story. For my father's benefit, I explained how his business had failed 5 years ago, how the bank was about to foreclose, how, to save him from the shame of losing his home, I had used my own money, the money from my little computer job, to buy the house outright, through a blind trust, so he would never have to know his own daughter had bailed him out. I told him how I had created the story of the anonymous benefactor to protect his pride, how I had paid the property taxes every year, how I had paid for the new furnace, the new roof, the endless, costly upkeep of this massive, aging house, how I had done it all. For him, out of love, as I spoke. My father sank onto a nearby chair, his face a mask of crumbling disbelief and dawning, gut-wrenching shame. He looked at his wife, my mother, and his son, my brother, the two people who had just conspired to kick me out of the very house I had saved for them. And for the first time, I think he truly saw them for what they were. "You changed the locks on my house," I said, my voice now cold as ice as I turned my gaze to my mother and brother. "You sent me a text message, exiling me from the home I was caring for, from the father I was protecting. You treated me like the hired help. You decided I was a problem to be disposed of. So," I continued, "from this day forward, that is how I will treat you, not as my family, but as my tenants." My lawyer, Michael, stepped forward. He placed a thick, legally binding document on the antique coffee table, a table that, I now realized, was legally mine. "What is this?" Liam asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "That," I said, "is a standard, month-to-month lease agreement. I had my lawyer draft it this morning. It's for you." They just stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. "The rent," I continued, my voice calm and businesslike, "is set at the current fair market rate for a property of this size in this neighborhood, which is $6,000 a month." My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. "It is due on the 1st of every month, starting next month," I went on, relentless. "I will also require a security deposit equal to 2 months' rent, to be paid by the end of the week. The lease stipulates that you are responsible for all utilities and minor repairs. I, as the landlord, will continue to handle major structural issues, as I have been doing for the past 5 years." I looked at them, at their pale, horrified faces. "So, you have a choice. You can sign the lease and continue to live here, in my house, as my tenants. You can learn what it feels like to pay for the roof over your own heads. Or," I said, letting my gaze linger on my mother, "you can refuse, and if you refuse, my lawyer will proceed with the 24-hour eviction notice he has in his briefcase. and I will have Officer Davies here escort you from my property for trespassing. I pulled a pen from my purse, a beautiful, heavy fountain pen. I placed it on top of the lease agreement. I will need your decision by the end of the day. I said, take your time. My father was now openly weeping, quiet, shuddering sobs of a man who has just been confronted with the full, devastating scope of his own failure as a husband and a father. My brother just stared at the lease, his face a mask of utter defeat. And my mother was looking at me with a look of pure, undiluted hatred, the look of a queen who has just been checkmated by a pawn. I turned away from them and walked through my living room, my home. I ran a hand along the wall, feeling the cool plaster beneath my fingers. It was a good house, a house I had saved, a house I had just reclaimed. The unpaid caretaker was gone, the landlord had arrived, and rent was due.